Our next panelist is Manish Chakraborti. Manish is a conservation architect and his office, Continuity, founded in 1998, specializes in architectural conservation, building restoration and retrofit, historic interiors and urban conservation and management advice, is one of the leading conservation practice which has been widely published in the national and international journals and media. He has authored various books on architecture and conservation, guided students' thesis, a guest columnist, a visiting faculty to schools of architecture in India, and adjunct professor, Amity School of Architecture, Kolkata. He has a graduation in architecture from Jadavpur University and masters in urban planning from Indian Institute of Technology and conservation from University of York in UK. He has been awarded fellowship from Charles Wallace Trust, India Foundation for the Arts, Bangalore, Goethe Institute, Germany, Cultural Trade Delegation, Italian Government, and Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, wherein he undertook intensive training and delivered lectures in conservation planning, strategies, and techniques. Member of professional bodies like Indian Institute of Architects, Indian Town Planning Institute, International Council of Monuments and Sites, and an invited member of the Heritage Committee of the Kolkata Municipal Corporation. He has been a consultant to the World Monuments Fund, National Museum of Denmark, Asian Development Bank, Department of Culture, Government of Rajasthan, INTAC, and Archaeological Survey of India. He is the recipient of UNESCO Asia Pacific Heritage Award of Distinction 2016 for the conservation of St. Olaf Church among 40 entries from Asia Pacific region for benchmarking conservation practice in India and the region. He was conferred with Society Interiors Honors Award in 2017 for 2 decades of conservation advice and practice in India. Monish.
Thank you very much indeed. I just added this picture emanating from Aishwarya's presentation about costing of heritage buildings in Kolkata and West Bengal. This project I did about 20 years ago. This was a very simple 2-storied house. Does anybody know whose house is this? It was the house of Bidyasagar on Badurbagan Street in North Calcutta, deep in North Calcutta. It's almost like the Bengal Renaissance, where you have the Bidyasagar's house, Vivekananda's house, Raja Ram Mohan Rai's house, Tagore's house. So it was kind of a Bengal Renaissance, which was unison to Indian Renaissance. It was about 5,000 square feet of space, maybe a little more too. Yeah. And we spent about 12 lakhs. This is the cheapest project that I did in my life till now. And that was my first project. We did all that we do today to a building. I postulated certain theory out of it. Just on the other side of the road, PWD was restoring Ram Mohan Rai's house. And their initial cost was about 22 lakhs, which finally rose to 1 crore 22 lakhs 20 years ago. This is a typical way of a contractor getting into a government project where the project gets escalated over a period of time. The postulate that I derived out of that was, in a conservation project, if it is kind of doing mostly the essential repair, which is one of the most important principle of conservation, you generally, if you're spending more than 5 to 6 lakhs per month, you better check out whether you're actually doing conservation or not. Because conservation is about spending money on human resources, on very little money on material. And why the cost of the other building was escalating day by day, the reason being simple. They were stripping many things. They were rejecting many things. And they were renewing many things, right? And it's a very simple methodology. Whenever you don't study the building extensively and correctly, you land up making sweeping decisions. You say, oh, this beam seems to be not appropriate, let's change it. This frame seems to be not appropriate, let's change it. And thereby, you escalate the cost and bring in whole issues of using the same material, compatibility and others, but you have actually done a greater destruction to the monument than restoring it. Examples of such restorations which are frivolous are abounding in India. And that is my postulation, which is an important postulation, I would say, because conservation has been therefore pushed into the zone of being elitist. Conservation is viable. And if this can be proved, I think it's a very important proposition that we conservation architects who arduously should take this task of making conservation viable. I take back to 1970s Italy, where conservation was defined as a social appropriation of space, where multitude of ordinary buildings were restored or conserved with very little money. Of course, the scenario was it was the government who decided that they will have to improve the existing housing stock. Calcutta has got a lot of similarities in that context. We have listed about 1,300 buildings in Kolkata in various grades, but we have listed them, but we have not given them any drip and allowed them to die, right? I think there should be a very important campaign that needs to go in, which should kind of force or argue or delineate that all the restored, all the listed heritage buildings should be granted with repair grants. And that's very important for a city like Calcutta, which has got a huge amount of heritage building stock. It almost shows on you. If you come to Calcutta, any outsiders coming to Calcutta cannot miss it. But they go back with a very sad state of affairs. And therefore, it's the responsibility and onus on us, not only by the government, but also by the other organizations who are working. Like I know a couple of leaders of such organizations here in this group, which needs to really campaign of following it up of all those listed buildings. If the government can pay for the construction of bridges, if the government can pay for the construction of convention centers at Digha to the tune of 200 crores, I think the government can also pay for the repair grant that each and every 1,300 buildings needs desperately. Now I go to my original presentation. This was 5,000 square feet. It was about 15 lakhs, including the electrical and plumbing. And so it roughly came about 500 rupees per square foot 20 years ago, which will be, say, 1,000 rupees per square foot today. And the average cost of construction of new buildings will be about 1,800 rupees per square foot. So I think 1,000 to 1,200 square feet, if the person in charge who's looking into the whole scheme of things applies himself judiciously and innovatively, and also applies himself from the point of view of principles of conservation and not be frivolous, I think it can be brought down to that amount. I have a slider, isn't it? Yeah, it's there. Yeah. I have restricted my presentation to one important and the only one aspect of adaptive reuse. I'm not going to talk about anything else. I'm going to kind of develop only one singular point. Who is adapting whom? I think the answer lies in this. All subsequent decisions of what we are going to do to a building will emanate from this. Who is adapting whom? Is this, which is a pointer? This one? Is this the pointer? Whether these bricks are adapting to this, or the shells or the stones is adapting to this, or this mortar is adapting to the brick, who is adapting whom? Who is taking whom? I think that's a very, very critical question. and all answers of all subsequent decisions, all the questions that Aishwarya answered to his client will emanate by critically asking yourself who is adapting whom. I think it's very important that we understand once for all and very clearly that adaptive reuse approach calls for new work to be fitted to the old and not the other way around. If we try to make the old fit to the new, a lot of different problems will arise. You have an old space and you need to accommodate, you need to adopt to the existing envelope. Don't make the building fit to your requirement, right? So it's very important that the adaptive reuse approach fitting new to the old. All too often, old work is cut back or leveled off to make the job of inserting the new simpler. And in order to make this new add to that, we often remove this wall, we often change this overall composition and the configuration of this layout of the building and so on. Modeling the new to fit the old can be more complex and technically challenging, which Aishwarya pointed a couple of them, but it is necessary to ensure protection of an old building's surviving fabric. And here we constantly go wrong. It's not only lime, it's about compatibility. Even lime being not used could also act well. It's not a question of only using lime and therefore you're very conservation conscious. It's not about that. It's about how and where and you are actually trying to adapt the new. You're respecting the existing fabric in every step of yours, fitting new to the old and not the other way around. Therefore, the new, if it is a repair intervention, if it is a design intervention, that's why I put that into bracket. If it is a signage intervention, it should complement the old in terms of design, in terms of fabric, in terms of its layout, in terms of its method of construction, in every way that building stands. The building which was getting hammered in that film was taking a long time. That's the way of breaking a construction, the slab of which was reinforced concrete slab. It was not an old traditional slab. That's why it was making such a big sound. We don't break an old traditional building with Kuri and Borga, which is beam and runner, in the manner that was getting broken there in that film. Old buildings need, therefore, a very sympathetic adaptation. In other words, adaptation could be alteration, could be extension. Everything is possible on Nikki Tasha's kitchenette, which was the first kitchenette which came into the market long ago, I remember. But it has to be sympathetic. It has to be sympathetic adaptation to ensure their continuing usefulness. And we should be very much aware that we are not erasing the significance which is there in each and every number of bricks and mortar, in each and every lintel or arches of that building. They should not harm the old where they meet, nor create problems with future maintenance. Leveled off to make the job of inserting the new simpler. Often it may be better to leave. One of the measure of a conservation architect could be just not to do anything and work around it. And here I thought of a good example of Obin, the designer of the city in Kolkata, who did this wonderful project which I thought I should share. This is an old building. Not so old, but it's a building of a person who, this is the one, which is not a very ornate, very fantastic looking, very carvy building or a Rajputana architecture. But it is a building which is very dear to the owner. And it was built around 40s and 50s. And he wanted to keep it. And Obin worked around that building. He didn't touch this building. He worked around that building. Right? So that's an approach of not doing anything to the existing building. And that's what he created. So that was inspired. The studios, Obin's, I think it's a very sensitive, and when we say we, when we talk about conservation, when we say we, I include architects like Obin. I include developers like Harsh Neotia. I include conservation architect. I include engineers like you, sir, who are sensitive, who will not say like a brush that, this beam will not work, this needs replacement. Many buildings. I think Calcutta is replete, and I'm getting old, I'm 52 now. I think I'll not be able to see all these buildings being restored to its pristine glory, which it will very, very, very soon and another couple of decades. They were mostly considered as white elephants 10 years ago. But it's changing. People do not everybody. I mean, Aishwarya's myths are real. I'm not contesting that. But many considered at one point of time, even if it is a slow process, that these old buildings are white elephants. But that perception are changing to heritage dividends. There has been cases, we don't have to go to Delhi, Bombay. There are cases in Calcutta. There are abounding number of cases all over the world where the heritage has paid back. Greece would have been on the poverty line had there been no heritage. They made all the monuments collateral to the World Bank to get investments and loans. Heritage saved Greece. I'm not saying, the tourism will be to the extent for that in Calcutta. But Calcutta can be a fun city. Calcutta can go into that route of marketing and placemaking of Calcutta as a fun city. We have seen many examples.